the OCP Critical Facilities Operations Framework. This webinar will walk through the process called Security and Access. We will start with a process overview and then look at some lessons learned through customer experiences and end with final notes for you to consider when working with this process. The OCP CFOPS Framework is a free-to-use and open to be adjusted for your organization, where security and access is part of the on-site services of the whole framework. And it's the first process of those, and the other ones are presented in separate webinars. The security and access process is divided into two parts. The first one is the perimeter protection. The purpose of that one is to ensure that no breaches of the security to the facility are possible, regardless if these are sort of active man-made threats or if it's natural disasters that could break the facilities open and enable threats to the site operations. The perimeter protection aims to make sure that access can only be gained through the appointed access controls, and the rest of the building or the facility is not really useful to try and break through. And it's based on passive and active measures. Passive measures are the construction measures for the facility, for example, the thickness of walls and the resistance to earthquakes and so forth, whereas the active perimeter controls are based on, for example, patrols that monitor anything that happens, or you have CCTV controls around the building and perhaps the fences. It's been interesting to see for us here, being a Nordic company, that every time we have a US or UK based site owner asking us to manage their sites, they typically start off by expecting us to have armed on-site guards 24/7. But when explaining the cost levels for 24/7 services on site in the Nordics, and also the restrictions on the use of armed security guards, it usually doesn't take very long to convince them of the benefits and the reliability of having remote security monitoring combined with scheduled patrols and call-outs in case of incidents. The other part of the process is the access control. So if we have managed to have a good perimeter protection, which means that anyone that wants to gain access has to go through the access control points, the designated points, that means that they will have to be authenticated. That means the verification of the identity, and they also have to be verified that they are authorized to actually gain access. It's not good enough to know who you are. We also need to know that you have the right to be there. And to make sure that we can follow up that the access control works well, we also have logs of anyone accessing the premises and of course also leaving them. So that by having these three main points of authentication, authorization, and logging the access, you get a good manageable control of who gains access. What we've seen over the years is that our best customer experiences is when you have a clear split accountability between the site owner that is responsible, or if you like, accountable rather, for deciding who should be authorized to gain access to a critical facility. And then it is the supplier of the access control, typically an outsourced to a security company, but it could be the on-site team that is actually in-house, or it could be a site management function, depending on how you set this up. The point is, whoever handles the actual access control, they are accountable for the authentication, making sure that the person who claims to be someone actually is that person. So by combining this, that the owner says, I allow, for example, Lucas to get access to the site, and then the service provider says, Lucas, can you show us an ID to prove that you are you? And we can validate that. Then we see that, yes, you are Lucas and you have the right to gain access. That's when the process works and gets logged, because then we can bring in independent auditors to review the access logs to make sure that the process has been fulfilled in a good manner. Some final notes. Passive perimeter protection is good, but it should be complemented by active protection measures. It's not enough to have passive protection for a critical facility. If you really want to protect it, you need to combine that or add on to that, for example, CCTV monitoring or some sort of active alarms that reacts to burglar attempts or break-ins or other things. Access control, that process actually relies on a well-managed process for team and suppliers management. What is that then? Well, that's the process that contains the staff register. And the staff register is the repository that shows who is qualified and who is authorized and what are the requirements to get the access and so forth. And don't forget that this is an on-site process, and any works provided on-site should always include updating and finalizing related documentation and service records. In this case, it's typically it's the access log that is the updated documentation. And because we handle personal data, you need to consider the GDPR regulations of the European Union. And that's the GDPR stands for General Data Protection Regulations. So that's the important part to consider here. Hope you will join us for other process webinars.